Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is my friend Isabelle Wheeler. Welcome to the podcast, Isabelle.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Isabelle is faithful Latter-day Saint, a returned missionary who identifies as non-binary. And we're trying to do as many podcasts as we can with transgender and non-binary Latter-day Saints so we can understand their stories. Isabelle is non-binary, takes they, them, gender-neutral pronouns. So I will try to do that as much as possible in this podcast. I hope to be perfect, but I may not, and slip into she, her.
No worries.
And you're very gracious. I met Isabelle when I spoke at the UVU Institute Allies and LGBT workshop that's being held in Orem, Utah, as part of the UVU Institute, and met many of our queer Latter-day Saints there and got the chance to meet Isabelle. And I'm so honored to have their story on the podcast. And when we know better, we do better. Now, some more background. In the Desert News, we're recording this on June 7th. There's an article that we'll link to in the show notes at the Desert News, church-owned Desert News, that says 1 in 20 young adults, that's 19 through 29, and Isabelle's in the middle of that age range, identify as transgender, non-binary. So this is a pretty good big group of people that identify as Isabelle identifies. And the article goes on to point out the importance of hearing people's stories and that they felt this way for a long time. This generally isn't a cultural fad or a short-term thing. This is something that someone's felt for quite a bit of time. And we'll hear how Isabelle feels about those feelings. Isabelle, tell our listeners where you served a mission.
I had the opportunity of serving in the exotic land of Southern Florida. Got to speak Spanish. One of the most challenging times of my life, but also most rewarding. Very grateful for the experiences I had there.
And were you English speaking or Spanish speaking?
Spanish.
And just so our listeners know, how did you identify on your mission?
So I served as a sister missionary, was really closeted, only came out to my mission president and a few companions, but publicly presented as female.
Okay. That helps our listeners just know kind of where you've been and where you are now and how you navigated serving a mission as a non-binary Latter-day Saint. And I think we'll talk more about that. Also, back to the LGBTQ and Allies workshop at UVU, that's Utah Valley University Institute. Isabelle will be part of a panel on June 15th. This podcast will be released before June 15th. If you're listening after June 15th, that's okay. You won't be able to come. But if you want to come and hear Isabelle and other transgender and non-binary Latter-day Saints, there's a panel of 3 or 4, and you're going to be on that panel.
Yep.
And that's open. It's not live streamed or Zoomed, but we'll link in the show notes to the address in Orem, Utah. It's open to everybody. And it's just a chance for you to hear the experiences of transgender, non-binary Latter-day Saints. And I'm grateful for the UVU Institute that's doing that. Do you want to say anything about that workshop?
I guess I just want to repeat it. Unfortunately, it's not Zoomed or live streamed. Hopefully, maybe that'll change in the future. But I got a lot of questions about that. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Good. I'm glad that that's happening. So I may have mentioned this, but I can't remember. Tell our listeners a little bit about what you're studying at UVU and what you potentially would like to do with that degree.
Yeah, so I am a psychology major at UVU. I don't know exactly what I'd like to do with that yet, but I'm toying with the idea of going into research. That involves getting a doctorate degree, so we'll see if we get that far. But especially on my mission and in Florida, just seeing so many diverse kinds of people, I became really interested in faith development and how people form their different beliefs. So I'd love to do research in that area, but that may change.
It's really cool. I think the UVU has a terrific psychology department from what I know. And
yeah, it does.
And so it's really cool you're there. And thanks to all involved in that department. And I'm drawn to psychology and some of these degrees that help us understand how to bring us together as the same human family and sort of research-based perspective. To me, it's part of the doctrine of Christ to understand things that can bring us together as the same human family. But with that, I think both of us would just invite you to act on the spiritual impressions you feel. If you're non-binary or transgender, closeted, not closeted, I think our joint prayer, and we prayed before this podcast, that something that Isabelle shares with you will be helpful for you. And you won't feel alone. You'll feel more hope. If you have suicidal ideation, maybe that will be improved when you hear a story of another person that's been walking this road and bravely sharing their story. If you're a parent or a local leader of a transgender and non-binary member of your ward, our joint prayers, the things that Isabelle shared, will help you help them. And just all of us to be able to hear stories helps us to understand and see people as the same human family. So anything I said you want to correct so far? Are we okay?
No, I think you're good.
Okay, so I will just turn it over to Isabelle to share their story.
All right. Yeah. Thank you again so much for doing this. So like you said, I believe you mentioned I'm from California. My story is a little bit unique in that I didn't really grow up with gender dysphoria, or at least it wasn't really something that was on my mind very much. I can think of maybe a few instances throughout my youth, but nothing that really jumps out. And to be honest, it just wasn't something I really gave much thought to. I was raised in the church. I've always been a very spiritual person and just very committed to the church. And I think I was definitely influenced by some of the maybe the negative side of church culture when it came to LGBTQ issues. I had a very negative attitude in that regard, was made very uncomfortable with the idea of gay people, and I guess by extension, transgender people. Even to the point where when I found out a close family member of mine was gay, I didn't react very positively to that, which I of course feel bad about now, but it was just the mindset that I had back then. A couple things maybe that I'd like to point out, maybe from a young age, I was bothered by a few things, maybe like women in the priesthood, the family proclamation and how it explains like parental roles. Those were things that were kind of unsettling to me, but it wasn't something that I really devoted a lot of time and energy to. It just kind of was just bothering me in the back of my mind, but I just didn't really give it much thought until I was in college. My family actually moved from California to Idaho near Rexburg. It was quite a journey at the time. They weren't really expecting it. They just got the prompting to move, and I think I was a little nervous about being able to leave the nest because I had planned on attending BYUI, and they were going to be living right there close by. But it turned out to be okay, and it was nice to have them close by. But anyway, as I was just a freshman at Brigham Young University, Idaho, I was exposed to the dating culture there, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. There's that big pressure to, get married, right? And there's this kind of attitude that I got from people, when I told them that I was planning on serving a mission, had, kind of always planned on serving a mission, was something I was really passionate about. And they just kind of said like, oh, well, like since you're a girl, like if, like, you never really know, like you might get married. And I was like, no, I think I kind of know I'm going on a mission. It's like, well, but I mean, like you're a girl and well, if you don't get married, before you're 19, like, yeah, you can serve a mission. And, that that bothered me a bit. But more than that, just other things about culture were just starting to really rub me the wrong way, I guess. I was just, out of high school, trying to, find my place in a young adult world and interacting, with my peers, my male and female peers. And something just felt kind of off. And I, kind of recalled, things like women in the priesthood in the church, and then, family proclamation. And those things just started to really bother me a lot more. And I couldn't really describe it, but it was just hard. It didn't sit well with me, and just how I felt about myself and how I viewed myself. Another thing that was going on during that time is I had a really good friend in high school who was a guy, and we had liked each other but hadn't really talked about it. And when we were both in college, I brought it up. I was like, hey, I know we like each other. I just wanted to get that out in the open. And I was very adamant on not being in like a committed relationship, because I was going on a mission. He was also going to go on a mission. And my mindset was, I cannot be in a steady relationship before I serve a mission. That was just my mindset at the time. But despite that, this boy and I, we grew closer together in a very romantic sense. Our relationship grew, and while it was exciting, because I really liked him, the dynamic just felt really weird. And again, I didn't really know how to describe it, but I just felt uncomfortable in this like quote unquote girlfriend role, and it just didn't sit well with how I felt about myself. And as this was going on, I opened up to my parents. I have always had a very close relationship with my parents. Very, very open. They do great at unconditional love, and I am grateful for that. And so I went to them, and I, talked to them about, these thoughts and feelings I was having, and the struggle I was having, just about the church and this faith crisis. And it was very messy, because it was just at the beginning stages of, coming out to myself. And I didn't know how to put words to how I was really feeling. So it was distressing and confusing to them. Also my story wouldn't be complete without explaining that I have anxiety. I've clinical anxiety, have had since I've been a kid. And so because I was, presented with this, I guess just this paradox, this conflict I felt with my faith, it really triggered my anxiety. And so I would just ruminate about it and just try to figure it out. Like, what does this mean? Why do I feel so uncomfortable with the idea of this, female role in the church and the gospel? I really don't get it. And it eventually led me to a place of depression, which I hadn't experienced before in my life up until that point. But I began to be really depressed, all the while still preparing to serve a mission. Eventually, I got my mission call to Florida, and I went through the temple to be endowed. And unfortunately, that was a very hard experience. In the temple, things are pretty gendered. And I just felt like I didn't fit. And that experience of just being in there, and not feeling, like a joyful, uplifting feeling scared me because, it's the temple. It's the house of the Lord. This is, where I'm supposed to feel close to God. And instead I felt anguish and turmoil, and, started to really think like, what's wrong with me? Why are my feelings about myself in this great conflict with, the temple and with the family proclamation, what I've been taught at church. So that was very hard.
Thank you so far for just being so honest, Isabelle, with how you feel. I sense, just doing your very best, just dealing with being uncomfortable and trying to push forward. It sounds like you have a fundamental testimony of the church and are pushing forward to serving a mission out of good reasons because you want to help people. And at the same time, holding and talking about just where you don't fit in and some of these things just, cause just, so I don't know, I think you've done a really good job of explaining. I think other people feel at times the same way you do. And it's probably good that people feel they're not alone. Some may, some may hear part of the story and say, well, I'm assuming she didn't serve a mission and she left the church. Well, it's really just the opposite. And I just use your pronouns, she, her. So I'm trying to use they, them. But so you're going to talk about, kind of pushing through these experiences and your decision to serve a mission. And that may still have at times been very difficult. So, but I sense in you are holding both things, these things that are difficult for you and fundamental belief in, our restored doctrine and putting words in your mouth and desire to bring hope and healing to the people of Florida now. Yeah.
No, that is definitely accurate. I had wanted to serve a mission, since I was like really little. And I guess I've always had this very strong commitment to the gospel and to the church, and had never really struggled with it before, and I had a testimony, and just felt a very, very strong urge to go. And I think I'd like to point out, health comes first. And if people maybe in a similar situation are not sure whether or not, they're going to serve a mission, I would point out that health comes first. And, if going on a mission is not something that you end up doing, that is okay. So I just wanted to point that out. But for me, it was something that I've wanted to do and felt like I, felt called to do. That being said, by the time I left, I was just in this state of like despair, because I had loved the gospel my whole life, but now these feelings of just, like, well, I don't feel like I'm just this, I'm strictly female, and that doesn't vibe well in the church. Like, because of that, I just didn't know how to reconcile that conflict. And so, I just felt a lot of darkness and fear and despair, going into it. but I went into it anyway with just really nothing but hope that somehow things would be okay. This was still something I thought about a lot in the MTC and in the field. It was always on my mind, my gender identity. And I think it's been interesting hearing other queer stories. I've really only heard mostly like from gay men, where it's kind of like they're able to put their sexuality out of their mind during their mission, which I think could serve a great purpose and really help you focus. But that was not the case for me. This was something that I was just wrestling with all the time.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it really was. I was able to kind of put it aside to an extent. It was kind of like being in survival mode, just, because on a mission, so much is thrown at you. You're so busy. And so, I did my best, to learn how to teach lessons, to learn how to serve the members, and learn how to improve my Spanish. I'm half Mexican, by the way. I know I don't look it, but I had been speaking a lot of Spanish before even going out. But anyway, the mission, while it did keep me very, very busy, my struggle with my gender identity was still on my mind a lot. I did come out to my mission president during my first transfer. He was the only person aside from my parents that I came out to. His response was very respectful, which I'm very grateful for. And his advice was mostly this, I guess this like continue to serve the Lord and this will be resolved. He never said the words like this will go away as you serve, but that was kind of, I guess, the vibe I got. But I tried to, muster as much faith as I could and keep serving. But things finally came to a head. My first general conference, at the end of my first transfer. Many transgender people are probably familiar with this general conference. Is October of 2018. And President Oakes gave a talk titled Truth in the Plan. And in it, he talked about gender, and talked about the eternal nature of gender, and just said some things that were very, very hard for me to hear, about like, Satan seeking to, confuse gender. And, up until this point, I'd been kind of, just wrestling with the Lord and saying like, is there a way I can reconcile this? Or like, is there a way I feel that I'm, not like purely female nor purely male. I wish I could describe more of what that's like, but it's really difficult. But is there a way that like that can be true for me, and I can still, be a member of the church and, love the gospel. But when he gave that talk, it felt like a knife was being plunged into my gut. It was actually a very traumatic experience for me. I can still remember just sitting there in the chapel, with my companion, just watching the screen and just feeling this sense of dread. And, was just really, I I felt like my eternal life was over in a way, which maybe sounds a bit dramatic, but um, that's how I felt. Um, I felt that you know I guess God's just trying to tell me here that like I am a woman, and that just doesn't sit right with me. It doesn't feel right, and but I guess I'm just broken. I guess I don't know. Um, and I lasted a couple days dealing with that until P-Day rolled around, and finally just kind of broke down to my companion and was like, "Look, I'm depressed." And she got me hooked up with my mission president's wife to try to get me some counseling and also see if I would benefit from like some medication. Something interesting about that experience, something that my mission president's wife said, never repeated, was never told to me again throughout my mission, but is something that I really clung to, is, after I explained to her, what was going on, why it was that, I was so depressed. She explained, first of all, you're not the only one of our missionaries that has talked about this, or that has come to us, explaining, like expressing hurt from this talk. And she also said, I believe Heavenly Father is not done revealing what there is to know about gender. And that is something that I clung to for the rest of my mission, and still believe to this day. Yeah.
It takes courage to be that open and vulnerable with how a general talk affected you, and being honest with that. And listeners, my earlier self gut reaction like 5-10 years ago would be to defend the conference speaker, to defend our doctrine. And now I've learned I can support and sustain our leaders and our doctrine, and sit with Isabelle and honor your pain and validate how you feel. And it's not an either or. And to me, it's a principle of ministry, even though I don't understand everything you felt, not to make you prove your pain to me, like saying, oh, aren't you just taking us a little too literal or serious, or overthinking this? Or is there really something else going on here and you're using this as something else? And to me, all those sort of just invalidate your pain, and to me, potentially drive any wedge between you and the church deeper if I dismiss your experience. But I've learned that if I just validate how you feel, it doesn't mean as a committed Latter-day Saint I'm selling out our church, our doctrine, our leaders. I'm just sitting with you and honoring how you feel, and I can do both. And I think that's just a principle of ministering. And so I'm glad you were honest with the difficult church experience. And just remember that here you are giving 18 months of your life to help people come into Christ. And all this is born out of love and sacrifice to help others. And in the middle of that, you're working through your gender identity. You're bravely coming out to your mission president, which takes so much courage because you have no idea how that conversation is going to go. You're talking to your companions. You've talked to your parents. And then in a space that should be sort of the most healing and hope-filled, as you're kind of coming back to have your cup filled, which often what happens at General Conference for missionaries, you have a difficult experience. And so I'm just glad you're open with that. And that's just the way, listeners, I process this space when someone tells me an experience like that. And even if I didn't feel that way, I kind of see things through the lens of my queer friends now. And so I might be a little more in tune with the talk that might be difficult for people I really care about, that are trying to fully participate in the church and find their place. and just recognize we have more work to do. So that was a really honest segment.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for expressing that. And I, in turn, just wanted to say, at the time then and also now, I felt and feel this equal, I guess, fear of, I don't want to sell out any of the general authorities or, or doctrine per se. The fact that, that talk hurt me so much, just caused even more pain, because I was like, this is not how I'm supposed to feel, right? Is what I told myself, this isn't something that I should be having a problem with, right? If I, really believe in the gospel, and even now it's like the last thing I want to do is to be in a space where I'm at odds with a general authority. That's not a space I want to be in at all. Because I believe in the church. But that's the situation I found myself in and still find myself in. And it's a hard space to navigate. But I do it the best I can. Because just of my own experiences that I've had with Heavenly Father as I've tried to navigate this space. And I think I understand that, people have, their different opinions, about like what, why transgender people exist. But I hope that's, part of the benefit from doing this podcast is to hopefully help people understand this isn't coming out of a place of rebellion. It's coming from just a place of honesty. So, yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Done a good job of that. And I hope listeners can feel there's just a sincere desire to be honest with your gender identity, and also to fully participate in the church and see the church grow and have other people come to the church. And in some ways it's hard to be in your space, and because you don't want to give either up. And some people would say, well, you've got to give up one or the other, but I sense you're pretty committed to both. And it's your lived reality is, you want to participate in the church and you're honest with how you feel. You can't just press a button to feel differently about either. One of my favorite comments to read, and then I want to make sure to send it back to Isabelle. This is from my book, Listen, Learn, and Love, Embracing LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. And Chapter 8 is about transgender Latter-day Saints. It's the only chapter I wrote about just one letter of all the LGBTQ, because sometimes non-binary and trans get sort of left behind the discussion from gay and lesbian people. But this is from Monica Phillips, the mother of a transgender son, active LDS mother in Arizona, doing wonderful work. I'll read this. Before meeting any transgender individuals, I concluded that being transgender was a sign of the last days, society going downhill, or Satan's influence confused God's children. My mindset has changed by getting to know several transgender members, and I echo the words of Monica Phillips, quote, I don't believe Satan's work has been to deceive people into being LGBTQ. Instead, he takes his precious children, God, and tells them they're worthless. He tells them there's no place for them in God's plan. He tells them God no longer loves them. He resides in their shame. He also resides in our fears, knowing that our fears will hinder our ability to true love. His goal is to tear families apart and drive people away from the gospel of Jesus Christ. He is succeeding, not because this group has been deceived and are now gay or trans. He is succeeding because he is keeping us coming together as the body of Christ with pure Christ-like love. we can do better to heal members who are hurting and feel they have no place within us. Each member is vital. Without them, we cannot function as a church to our fullest potential. The answer to overcome Satan, strengthening families, and bringing people to Christ is love. So, yeah, sometimes listeners, and I've been guilty of this, things I don't understand that don't fit in my tidy box, I just explain away with, this is Satan and a sign of the last days. And I do believe Satan's real, and there are things that are occurring in the last days. But I don't think the existence of LGBTQ people is the sign of the last days. I think just like the existence of people that are left-handed or blue-eyed or red hair, they're minority populations within the human family. I don't think they're a sign of the last day either. They're just part of the beautiful diversity that makes us the human family. But being non-binary is just new, and it's different, and it might be scary, and we might want to put it back in our box or point to a specific something and say what you're experiencing to make it safe for me is this, versus taking the time. And I call it the trap of unearned opinions, is developing opinions about a group of people without first listening to lots of people in that space and then forming opinions. So in this case, listening to non-binary people and being open enough to say, I'm not going to form opinions till I listen to people. So thank you, listeners, for being on the podcast listening. So I'll turn it back to you after that little segment to talk. You could continue with your mission. You could talk about post-mission.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I love that quote by Monica Phillips.
You're familiar with that, I assume.
Yeah, it's a good one. So for a while, after General Conference, I got a new companion. They got me hooked up with a counselor, and also medication. And it was interesting because those things helped, but only to an extent. What I was feeling at the time was, if I like, believe, like my own gender identity is, like really truly like what I am. Like if I really believe this and act on it, like I could fail to reach the celestial kingdom. And I can't express how heavy that is. Especially as I'm, trying to serve a mission and, teach the restored gospel to people, when I myself am like, well, I don't even know if I'm going to make it. But, so struggling with that, I was like, is medication really going to help me? Is that really going to fix me? And, one of the things, as I was going to doctors, they looked at and like, oh, you could also, could have like a thyroid problem, like, check to see, if your like hormones are in balance. And I'm like, really? Like, is that the cause of, like my, gender incongruence? I didn't have a word for it then, but, they checked my hormone levels. They were fine. And then when I was put on medication, it didn't, I was kind of hoping it would like kind of shine a light onto, like exactly what was going on and make everything all better, but it didn't. It was kind of more like putting like a blanket over all my, my deep worries. They were still there. But it just kind of like numbed me to them a little bit. You were talking about, listening, right? And with this new companion I had, that was actually exactly what she did. I struggled the hardest during my second and third transfers while I was serving with her. I, just with the weight of everything, I started to become nauseous and I couldn't eat. I lost weight. Every morning I just woke up with a pit in my stomach of just kind of feeling this like eternal dread. And there are times where I just couldn't work. But this companion of mine was very, very compassionate. And she listened to me. And she didn't offer any sort of unsolicited advice or like, oh, well, I bet it's just this, or you just need to do this. She just listened to me and sat with me in my pain, which is something that you've talked about a lot. And she was just the perfect example of that. Also, during this time, I got a few priesthood blessings just from some of the elders in my district. I didn't come out to them. I was, just like, oh, I'm having a hard time. But in those blessings, I had some very strong spiritual experiences that one of the biggest things, that stood out was Jesus Christ understands exactly what you are going through. And, in my mind, I thought, like, wow, that's kind of crazy. Like, Jesus knows what it's like to be transgender. Or Jesus Christ knows what it's like to be me, a biological female, not feel female, and struggle to fit in within the church. And that brought me a lot of comfort. And another thing that was mentioned in those blessings was that God was with me and proud of me, and He was going to reveal to me over time, what this all means. And that's a blessing I'm still waiting to be fulfilled. But it's one that I have a lot of hope in. So because of those experiences, and even more so, I learned to just kind of let it go. I mentioned, that because of my anxiety, I was just ruminating over it and just praying, like, help me figure this out. Help me see like how this all works together. And I learned to just kind of let it go. That, there's a higher purpose to everything, and there's, God just has an understanding that we don't have. And with that, I was pulled out of my really deep depression, and was able to serve the rest of my mission. It was still very hard. I still struggled a lot, but I was, for lack of a better word, I was functional. I could serve and teach people, and had many amazing experiences.
On behalf of all of us, thanks for serving a mission and spending all the 18 months, and the personal work you did, people that were helpful in your life, and a lot of people I would guess you blessed along the way. And you're not going to like to hear this word, but I think it's heroic what you've done. And managing all the things you were doing internally, plus serving a mission. I think you look back and increasingly be even more pleased with what you've done, given what was going on. I love sort of this visual imagery that sometimes I think God will take us to the top of a mountain at some point in our life and let us see the totality of the lives we blessed. And I bet there's a lot of people that you're not aware of in your mission that are better and happier and are blessed because of your service. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got a couple. Yeah, keep sharing your story. You're doing such a great job, Isabelle.
Oh, thank you. Well, coming home, I actually came home right when COVID hit, or maybe right before it hit. I came home
And the funny thing is, everybody knows when it is now. It's like March of 2020.
Exactly. I came home, I believe it was February 28th of 2020.
That is, yeah. So we all kind of have that time frame imprinted in our brains.
We do. Yeah. I came home, I gave my homecoming talk, and then that was the last Sunday that we had at church for a long time.
Wow.
And that was quite an adjustment, being a full-time missionary, proselyting outside to being released and quarantined. It was it was a difficult adjustment and just a weird one. But that gave me a lot of time to think and just reflect on my gender identity. And I was able to, find words like non-binary, expressing, when you don't feel male and you don't feel strictly female either. We have a word for that. I also like the word androgynous, because that one I feel like is already existed outside of the LGBTQ community. I started having conversations with my parents now that I was home. We had very difficult conversations. They were hard to have, as I expressed, this is, who I feel I am. But they were all very respectful conversations and loving conversations. And we just talked together and listened to each other. I also, got into, counseling again. I have a really good therapist now, who's very helpful for me. I also started to discover different queer Latter-day Saint spaces, like North Star. North Star was the first. Questions from the Closet. Love that podcast by Ben and Charlie. And then this podcast too, eventually. Where I just learned, how other people like me have navigated this space. The biggest thing I've struggled with since coming home, I really struggle to find, what is the origin of my gender incongruence, especially since, it wasn't something I'd had since being a little kid. And I think since I tried to prefer things to make logical sense, I just really struggled with that. And it was during this time where I was home and really looking into this, I had a lot of spiritual experiences. One of which was as I was trying to, figure this out, like why did I not feel this, when I was younger? And even for a period, like maybe in my later years of high school, like I definitely presented even as more feminine. And I was like, I don't want to invalidate that. Like, what do I do? And I just got this very clear impression that just said, invalidate neither.
Wow.
Don't invalidate, how you felt about yourself then. Don't invalidate how you feel about yourself now. Especially that now that I didn't really give much thought to it then versus now I have. So I don't really know what that all means. But it was just a very clear, distinct prompting I got from Heavenly Father. And the other thing was wanting to know what just my eternal gender is. And I mentioned that, a bit into my mission, I learned to kind of just set that aside and let it go. But now that, my mission was done, I came back to that and was just really really wrestling and struggling, like, Heavenly Father, just tell me what it is. Tell me what this all means. All I really want is to know the truth. There have been times where in tears, I've begged. I've begged God, tell me, no matter how painful it is, just tell me how I'm supposed to see myself, and tell me who I truly am. And if that's a woman, I will accept that. But that hasn't been the case. Heavenly Father hasn't told me that. I've had multiple spiritual experiences where it's kind of like I've just gotten this inkling of that there could be nuance to gender, and that, you know, there's something about my gender incongruence that is just hitting on something eternal that we don't understand yet. And I feel really nervous expressing that, because I know a lot of people feel differently. And all I can say is those experiences that I've had, I felt peace. I felt enlightened. I felt just this calm. And I don't really know how to reconcile that with, you know, what's in the family proclamation and what's, you know, said at church. But I just have a testimony that God sees the bigger picture, and I have a testimony that He has been teaching me and revealing things to me that, while I may not understand them now, how they fit in with the larger plan, I know that they do fit somehow, and it takes a lot of faith to be in that space and to have those beliefs. But it's where I'm at now. And I've tried my very best to approach God with an attitude of Thy will be done. But I've felt just very validated in my just experience of how I experience my gender. I've just felt very validated in it. And it's something that that has just brought me closer to God than I've ever been throughout my entire life.
That was a really good segment.
Thank
I
you.
hope through wherever you are, you felt the spirit of Isabelle's thoughts and her deep wrestle with personal revelation. We value that so much in the church. President Nelson has taught that over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to honor people's personal revelation. This is out of love, of a deep desire to understand. I wrote down kind of one of the phrases you said. I'm not going to say hitting on something eternal we don't fully understand or something like that. And
yeah,
I'm completely at peace with that we don't know a lot about everybody's experience, people that feel or are non-binary and transgender. And we do live in a church that has ongoing revelation, and that doesn't mean I know God's will or I should be instructed to leaders of the church, but I will sit and validate people's personal experiences that they're having, like yours. It's not my personal revelation to judge the accuracy of your personal revelation. It's my job to honor your personal revelation and sit with you as you're doing the hard work to understand. And I recognize this is all out of love. You want to understand your eternal nature. You want to understand the core of this. It's maybe managed, like you said, a blanket's put over it with medication. And that probably got you through your mission. But I love your desire. I call it the bottom of the iceberg. This is at the bottom of your iceberg. You want to know why this is at the bottom of your iceberg and core to your identity. And I love the feelings you're getting. And that is the formula we're taught in the church, is to do exactly what you're doing. And so, just support you and just tried as much as I possibly can. Cisgender listeners, is most of you and me, people that don't feel any of this. I'm biologically male. I feel none of this. One of my listeners has called it like being car sick, explaining car sickness to somebody in the 16th century that's never been car sick. We all understand what car sick is, and we all want to get out of the car and never feel that again. That's been the best example for me as a cisgender man, to understand what people feel. And of course, you want to understand the core of this, because it's just, you can't get out of the car. You can take some medication to pour sort of a blanket over it, but you want to understand why this is part of your lived experience. And society and people have a lot of explanations, but I think we have to let you do the very things you're doing to understand why. And I don't have any advice for you. I mean, I'm not in a position as a podcast host to give advice, but if I were, I'd say I trust you.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much.
And I believe in you, and I trust you, and I support you, and I think you're going really responsibly. I do in this book, this chapter, say invite people to go slow. Society sort of says this is how you do it if you feel this way, and I invite people to do this on their own, write their own stories. The term I use is don't listen to somebody else's story and say, that's my story. I think it's great to listen to other stories because it gives you principles you can apply to your story. But I think you're doing a great job of navigating this road. And I believe in you and I trust you. And I think you're doing a really terrific job. This may be a little triggering, but if anybody thought, I hope this isn't triggering, but you, in the earlier of the podcast, you talked about the family, the proclamation, and the role of women were uncomfortable for you. And some might say, well, that's at the core of your iceberg, and you became non-binary because you're uncomfortable with that. And I'm sorry to bring that up.
No, I'm actually very glad you brought that up.
This is back to people want to put this back into a box. And So if that's triggering and painful, but I just want you to address that. Why, which came first? To me, you being non-binary is what's caused these two things to be difficult for you versus the other way around. I'm assuming you'd read it that way, but explain that to our listeners.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. And that probably is triggering for a lot of people. And definitely it used to be for me.
Because people would probably say that's what's going on here or something.
Yeah, actually more that I said it to myself.
Oh, that's even...
I tried to, find that, like, what are the reasons, for why I am this way. And, and I think one of the hardest things, with being vulnerable like this is, people will, like you said, to kind of put things, in their tidy box, to try to come up with explanations for things is, I have that fear of, I'm going to come out and express this, and then people are going to say that as if I hadn't thought of it before. And I think especially for me, my type of anxiety is I tend to analyze all possibilities. And so I kind of feel confident, like if you have a theory, I've already thought it. I've tried very, very hard to be open-minded and to be in a sense, to remove myself from the situation, to figure out like, well, regardless of my feelings, like what is the truth? What is really going on here? And so, yeah, like my, struggles with, gender roles was, definitely one of those things I thought about. And, I don't have like a perfect answer for that, but I'm okay with that. Especially, since I've really started thinking about this and have, felt this way consistently for a while now. And it really does go beyond gender roles. I guess the only way to describe it is just kind of like this little voice at the very center of your being, that says, just like, oh, I am this, and it just is. I've had to learn to be okay that there's not a strong logical explanation for that. But it is what it is.
Thank you for that. We've got about 15 minutes. There's some I'm just looking at our outline. I don't know if you want to go into some of these different topics or just other things you want to share. I'll just let you run with it.
Oh, I think one thing I'd like to talk about is, the process of communicating with others and with family members specifically. I mentioned having difficult conversations with my parents, and they see things a little bit differently than the way I do. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a loving, respectful relationship. And I hear a lot from, the queer community, just this really big, push, for parents, to like accept their children, which, well, yes. But, and I think it's helpful, to explain, that, when they react in certain ways, it can be damaging, to their child's health. But I really think there needs to be more emphasis on just being patient with people and giving people time to sit with these things and, not to throw labels at them like, like homophobic and transphobic, because that doesn't help. And, even at this point, as I've, been talking with my parents, we still don't see eye to eye on things in this area, but we love each other a lot. And I just can't emphasize enough how important that is. One of the times that I really learned that for myself is as I was, talking about like, I just feel like I just can't fit into this, like this cookie cutter mold of, like what's outlined in the church, this like a cookie cutter, like marriage. And my mom was just like, that actually hurts a little bit, because I don't see my own marriage as a cookie cutter marriage. And, for some context, my mom is full Mexican and my dad is Caucasian, and they actually received some, negative, reactions to their intentions to get married. They received some, resistance, and it was very, very painful for them. And, that kind of, that opened my eyes to be like, you know what, like we're still all people, this really shouldn't be an us versus them thing. And so, if there are any LGBTQ people listening right now, first of all, be safe, of course. Don't you know don't stay in like toxic relationships. But if your parents, if your family members, are sincerely, like trying to have a good, positive relationship with you, just give them time and be patient with them and allow for difference of opinion. I think as members of the church, we struggle with that a little bit, with people who have different beliefs. But that's something I wanted to touch on. One of the biggest takeaways I've had from my journey.
I would title that segment "Grace," Isabelle, and just having grace for parents, for queer kids, and that there's going to probably most of the time be differences, but even in differences, there can be unity, love, understanding, and the family circle can stay tight even with differences. I think that to me is Zion. Zion isn't sameness where we're all in the same political party or the same nationality or the same race or the same sexual or gender identity. It's where we're finding space to support and love each other, even if we don't agree on everything. So then we can focus on lifting the burdens of others because we're sort of unified in our desire to lift the burdens of others in our circle and others outside of our circle. So that was a great segment on grace.
And I think I'd like to extend that to just the community within the church, the queer community within the church, because I've noticed a lot of different opinions there too. So me, for example, like I am fully supportive of mixed orientation marriages, staying single, and same-sex relationships and marriages, but that's me. And I think, as we're in this space, we get a little, I don't know, a little triggered as people take different life paths, which is understandable, but we really need each other. Us who are queer and trying to be in the church and love the gospel. Even though we have different opinions as to like what's okay and what's not okay, I think we need to have more grace for each other because we really need each other for strength.
I love that. More thoughts you'd like to share in just the closing few minutes of the time we have?
I guess just going off of different life paths. I understand if people are wondering this. I get it. As what I'm going to do as far as transitioning goes. I've made a very personal decision to present publicly as female. So at church and in most spaces, I use she, her pronouns. And I've decided not to look into like a full social transition or surgery or anything like that. I think my level of gender dysphoria is manageable enough where I can live without that. But again, everyone's path is different, and like I said before, even though I am open and willing to accept revelation from God telling me, if I'm if I'm a woman and, there isn't really any nuance to that. But I hold space for me for a belief that I have just an androgynous gender. And I don't really know what that looks like for eternity, but it's where I'm at. And among a few very close friends and family members, I ask people to use gender neutral nouns like person or individual, because that's how I feel most comfortable. And they're very validating, just in interacting with me, but for the most part, I publicly present as female, and that is something that I feel okay with, because I want to be able to hopefully be a link or a bridge builder in the church. And I also want to, I want to have my temple recommend, and I want to be able to serve in the temple still. So even though that is difficult for me, it's something that I personally am willing to do. And that's just my personal choice.
It's a great final segment, and just a lot of grace in that. I wrote down the word sacrifice, is that you, to fully participate in the church and to go to the temple, things that you want to do, there's some sacrifice involved there.
Yeah.
That straight Latter-day Saints don't face. They don't face the paradoxes that you face. And I think when we recognize the paradox, the double binds you're in, it helps us want to create more empathy, understanding, do everything we can to help you feel like you belong. And things like using the pronouns, the gender neutral pronouns. You have a smile on your face when people do that. It's just to me, that's just grace. It doesn't cost me anything to ask you what your preferred pronouns are and then honor those and use. So I just think that's part of, helping people feel like they belong, listeners, and listening to stories so we can do better. Will you take a second and just talk about this word? And I can't even say it.
Androgynous?
That's just define that word. That word's come up, and it's not a word I'm really familiar with. But just help us, just explain that word for us.
Yeah, for sure. So if you split it up, andro means male, and then I think it's pronounced just gin by itself. The gyn is female, and so androgynous is a word. It's been used like outside of the LGBTQ community. That just means not completely male and not completely female, and maybe like just kind of like a blend of both. So maybe like one example could be like I was on the phone with with like a customer service rep, and they had an androgynous voice. I don't know if they were male or female. So that's like one example of a use of that word. And then I, as well as other people, use it just to describe my gender identity. Whereas I don't feel completely male and I don't feel completely female. Me personally, I feel just kind of somewhere in between. And that's just how I experience myself as I am.
And thank you for that. I love the way you just dissected that word. I never knew that. I bet there's other listeners that never knew that either. And some cultures, this is just more part of the culture. People that I can't say this word right, androgynous.
Yeah.
That's something my daughter was talking with me recently about this. In her education and her lived experiences across the world, she's had experience with different cultures where this is just, more normal. I don't want to say this is abnormal the way you are, but culturally, there's a lot of expectations around gender, and our church was restored in a culture. So it's always, I'm open to just, as we continue to understand what's culture and what's doctrine, we'll continue to better meet the needs of people that walk harder roads, the best way I can describe it. So thank you for being on the podcast, listeners. We'll link to a few things in our show notes. This Desert News article that came out about 1 in 20 identify as trans or non-binary. We'll also link to the LGBTQ workshop that's being held on June 15th.
Yes. Yep.
That's Wednesday, June 15th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time at the UVU Institute. That's in Orem, Utah, and we'll put the address in the show notes. It's available to anybody that would like to attend. You don't need to be a student, but come and hear a workshop of Isabelle and some of their friends. I'll also put a link, just a free download of Chapter 8 of my book. I've referenced a little bit of that. If you haven't read that chapter, I'll just put a free link so you can download that and read that chapter just to learn more. But thank you, Isabelle Wheeler, for being on the podcast. You did a great job. It's a wonderful spirit, and I was deeply moved by the things you shared. And thank you, listeners, for joining us on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.